For the past 150 years, archaeological discoveries in the Near East have dramatically changed our understanding of the Bible and ancient Israelite culture. We've learned that many of the stories in Genesis, like the creation of the world and Noah's Ark, were influenced by older Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Canaanite stories. For instance, the flood story in Genesis is very similar to flood myths in the Eridu Genesis, Atrahasis, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. This shows that the Bible's writers drew from the rich literary traditions of ancient Mesopotamia. However, finding ancient stories that parallel the Garden of Eden has been more challenging. What were the ancient sources that inspired this tale? Did the writer who created the story of Adam and Eve come up with it on his own, or did he borrow it from earlier traditions? And how did a snake manage to sneak into the holy garden and disrupt God's plans? In this documentary, we delve into one of the Bible's most foundational stories and its roots in the cultures and literature of ancient Canaan and Mesopotamia. Elements like the sacred garden, the tree of life, and the creation of humans in the Eden story have clear connections to the myths and art of Israel's older neighbors. Remarkably, Old Testament scholars Mario Coparal and Johanna C. Deore propose a theory that even the story of Adam and the serpent has a direct predecessor in an ancient text from Ugarit. If true, this theory would significantly advance our understanding of the myths and beliefs that influence the Bible. The biblical account begins with Yahweh God creating the earth and the heavens. At first, there were no wild bushes or plants because God had not yet sent rain, and there was no man to till the soil. Instead, a flood arose from the earth, watering the surface of the ground. Yahweh God then planted a garden in Eden, located in the east, and placed the man he had created there. The ancient Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninhursag tells the story of the land of Dilmun before it was inhabited. Dilmun is a virginal land, a pristine land. In Dilmun, a raven was not yet calling, a partridge not yet cackling, a lion did not yet slay, and a wolf did not carry off lambs. Ninhursag said to her father Enki, "You gave me a city without a river, a city without fields, glebe, or furrows." Enki answered Ninhursag, "From the mouth of the running underground waters, fresh waters shall run out of the ground for you." At the beginning of the story, Dilmun is a barren desert without plants or animals. The goddess Ninhursag, who oversees Dilmun, asks the high god Enki to provide water. Enki listens to her request and causes fresh springs to appear in Dilmun, making the land habitable. He also fertilizes the soil with his semen, enabling it to produce plants. This mirrors the opening verses of Genesis 2, where the newly created land is devoid of vegetation until a spring emerges to water the ground. Yahweh then plants a garden in the east, bringing forth trees of every kind from the fertile soil. Dilmun was likely a real place, with most scholars identifying it as the island of Bahrain, which supported a rich commercial civilization for thousands of years. The myth of Enki and Ninhursag might have originated as a story explaining the origins of this wealthy kingdom and its abundant freshwater springs. However, in these ancient texts, a mythical version of Dilmun also emerges, distinct from the island of Bahrain. This mythical Dilmun is depicted as a mountain in the east where the sun rises. In the Eridu Genesis, the Sumerian flood myth, the flood hero Ziusudra, similar to the biblical Noah, is taken to this mythical Dilmun to enjoy eternal life. Ziusudra, being king, stepped up before An and Enlil, kissing the ground, and An and Enlil, after honoring him, granted him life like a god's, bestowing upon him the lasting breath of life like a god's. That day they made Ziusudra the preserver as king of the small animals and the seed of mankind. He lived toward the east, over the mountains in Mount Dilmun. The later Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh also describes the flood hero being taken to live in a mythical land beyond the mountains at the source of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. although it no longer uses the name Dilmun. To reach this land, Gilgamesh must achieve extraordinary feats, traveling to the edge of the world where the sun rises. Could this Mount Dilmun be a precursor to the biblical Eden? The scholarly perspective on this is nuanced. Some experts, like Dina Katz and Bernard Batto, argue that Dilmun is a weak parallel to the Garden of Eden. Batto contends there is no evidence that humans, even primeval ones, ever lived there, with the exception of the divinized flood hero, which he sees as an exception that proves the rule. However, Arthur and Alina George take a different view, suggesting that several elements of the Eden story have direct parallels in the Dilmun myth. We do not argue that Jay, the Yahwist writer, specifically utilized or even knew of all the above-mentioned Dilmun myths when composing the Eden story, but it is apparent that these motifs existed throughout the biblical world, much of it archetypal. It appears that Eden, like the mythical Dilmun, is also situated on a mountain. In Genesis 2, 4 rivers, the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, originate in Eden. Rivers typically have their headwaters in mountains, as they flow downhill from high elevations. Additionally, Ezekiel 28, which contains a possibly earlier version of the Eden myth, explicitly describes Eden as a garden on the holy mountain of God. Scholars Copperell and Diore further argue in their book that it makes sense to locate Eden near where Noah's Ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, far northeast of Israel. Even if the Sumerian myth of Dilmun influences the Eden story, there might also be parallels closer to home. The tablets of Ugarit, an important Canaanite city-state that existed before the Israelites, mention a sacred mountain with a vineyard where El, or Elu, the high god of the Canaanite pantheon, resided. And Yahweh Elohim made to grow out of the ground all trees pleasant to look at and good for food, and the tree of life in the middle of the garden, the tree of knowing good and evil. The tree of life motif is a well-known symbol in Mesopotamian art. Assyrian reliefs and cylinder seals often depict a sacred tree, typically a date palm, guarded by Apkallu, or hybrid birdmen. According to Helga Sieg, the Assyrian tree of life symbolized the divine world order maintained by the king. Similarly, sacred trees were a significant part of religious life in ancient Canaan. Most rural religious activities took place at sanctuaries called bamot, or high places, often situated near prominent trees on hills or elevated ground. Consuming the fruit of a sacred tree was considered a direct way to experience the divine. Outside of Genesis, sacred trees are frequently linked to the goddess Asherah, also known as Atharat, the feminine counterpart of El. The historical books of the Old Testament suggest that Asherah worship was prevalent in Judah and even at the Jerusalem temple until the religious reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah. Archaeological discoveries from various sites in Judah and Israel confirm Asherah's popularity and her association with sacred trees. In Anatolian and Syrian art, the storm god Hadad is often depicted carrying a tree or tree branch, symbolizing his role in fertility and rain, which nourished the earth's vegetation. Over time, the sacred tree itself came to represent Hadad. Another version of the tree of life, which is likely connected to the Eden story, comes from Greek mythology. According to numerous Greek authors, there were several nymphs called the Hesperides, who tended a garden at the western edge of the world. This garden belonged to the goddess Hera and contained a sacred tree that produced magical golden fruit. To prevent the Hesperides from picking the fruit themselves, Hera placed a multi-headed serpent named Ladon. The name Ladon almost certainly derives from Lotan, the seven-headed chaos serpent of Canaanite, Syrian, and Hittite tradition. This serpent appears in numerous ancient Bible passages as Leviathan, a multi-headed sea dragon vanquished by Yahweh at creation. How all these elements connect is challenging to determine. Did the Yahwist author know both the Canaanite sacred garden tradition and the Greek Hesperides tradition? Or did both the Israelites and the Greeks inherit the motifs of the garden, tree, fruit, and serpent from a common Near Eastern source? These questions remain unanswered, but we will explore the significance of the serpent further on. What distinguishes most sacred gardens and trees in various cultural myths is their association with earth goddesses. In contrast, the Eden story was penned by scribes of a religion centered around Yahweh, without a prominent goddess figure. Nonetheless, echoes of earlier goddess mythology may still linger, as we will explore. Despite the widespread presence of divine trees with diverse symbolic meanings in the ancient Near East, one of the greatest challenges in identifying a direct precursor to the Eden story lies in the unique roles assigned to its two trees: the tree of life, granting immortality, and the tree of knowledge, imparting understanding. However, other well-known myths offer plausible backgrounds for these elements. The ancient Mesopotamian myth of Adapa recounts how Adapa, the king of Eridu, is brought before the court of heaven and offered the food and drink of the gods, which would grant him immortality. However, the god Ea tricks Adapa into refusing the offer, thus ensuring that he remains a mortal servant on earth. For the Yahwist author, the challenge was to innovate by combining the concept of a sacred, fruit-bearing tree with the idea that consuming the food of the gods could grant immortality. Similarly, the tree of knowledge, from which Eve eats in the biblical narrative, bears resemblance to Pandora's box, often mistakenly called a jar. Like Eve, Pandora, the first woman in Greek mythology, brings sorrow and calamity into the world by opening the forbidden box. In this context, the tree of knowledge in Genesis can be seen as a symbolic counterpart to Pandora's jar in Greek mythology. Yahweh Elohim formed the human of dust from the ground and breathed into his nose life's breath, and the human became a living being. Across ancient cultures in the Mediterranean and Near East, there are stories about humans being created from dirt or clay. In Sumerian and Akkadian myths like Inanna, after the world's creation, gods wanted helpers. Enki, a god, instructed the mother goddess Nama to mix clay with his blood to form humans. A similar tale appears in Atrahasis, an Akkadian epic where gods complain about farming. Enki tells the mother goddess to use clay mixed with a slain god's blood and saliva from other gods to create humans. Berossus, a Babylonian historian, also wrote of humans made from dirt mixed with a slain god's blood. This god, Kingu, gave his blood, mixed with earth by other gods, creating humans with intelligence and divine wisdom. Greeks adopted a similar myth. Prometheus made men from clay, and Athena breathed life into them. These myths suggest that a human figure can be made from clay, but divine essence, often blood, gives it life. In Genesis, Yahweh's breath brings life. Interestingly, parallels exist between how Yahweh and Prometheus made the first man and how both Eve and Pandora brought misfortune due to curiosity, making the Greek myth closer to the Eden story. Historian John Bremer notes in his book Greek Religion and Culture, the Bible and the Ancient Near East that both Greeks and Hebrews drew from Near Eastern myths. Meanwhile, historian Arthur George, in an article for Mythology Matters, argues that the serpent in Eden echoes the West Semitic myth of the chaos dragon Lotan or Leviathan. George suggests the serpent symbolizes chaos in Eve's heart, and Yahweh's punishment parallels themes of dragon combat seen in other myths, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Gilgamesh, a Babylonian epic, Gilgamesh seeks immortality and learns of a magical plant that grants eternal life from Utnapishtim. However, a snake steals the plant, eats it, and sheds its skin, thus denying Gilgamesh eternal life. The motif of snakes shedding skin connected them with immortality in ancient beliefs. While there's no Adam and Eve in Gilgamesh, parallels to Eden's tree of life and the cunning serpent are evident. Corporal and Diore argue that understanding the Gilgamesh epic is crucial for interpreting the Garden of Eden story. However, they propose that the closest biblical precursor can be found in two lesser-known tablets from Ugarit. KTU 1-100 and KTU 117. This viewpoint isn't widely accepted yet in academia. Regardless, these tablets are intriguing because they challenge our understanding of the Eden narrative. KTU 1-100 is mostly intact but difficult to interpret, while KTU 117 is fragmented and also challenging to decipher. Discovered together in Ugarit's ruins, these tablets are believed to be related, possibly parts of the same text. Although KTU 1-100 is sometimes seen as a text for treating snake bites, Ugaritic expert Gregorio del Olmo Lete argues it's actually a canonical myth about magic and the potency of spells. The story begins with an unnamed goddess, described as the daughter of Shapshu and the daughter of sky and deep, appealing to the high god El, pronounced Ilu in Ugaritic. El resides at the source of two rivers where the Tigris and Euphrates meet, near the cosmic waters of heaven and the deep at the world's edge. This setting shares similarities with both Eden and Dilmun. The urgency arises from a serpent that has entered the land and inflicted a bite. The goddess invokes several Canaanite deities, Baal, Dagon, Anat, Resheph, among others, seeking their aid to destroy the serpent and neutralize its venom. None of the gods are able or willing to help. Finally, she turns to Horon for assistance. Horon, although not well known today, was a god of the underworld in ancient times. At Ugarit, he wasn't popular and didn't receive sacrifices. In other texts, he's described as the leader of demons and possibly associated with serpents. This meant he could punish people through them, but also offer protection from them. Despite his negative aspects, Horon was worshipped at various sites across Canaan. In the heartland of ancient Israel, cities like Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon were named after him, suggesting there were sanctuaries dedicated to him there. Horon's influence extended to Egypt, where he was sometimes identified with Horus and depicted as a falcon. In this myth, Horon comes to the goddess's aid by uprooting a tree near the Tigris River, which somehow removes the serpent's venom and saves the garden. Following this, there's a wedding ceremony where Horon presents serpents as a dowry to the goddess. The meaning of this story isn't straightforward. Corporal and Diore suggest that Horon, seen as a god of serpents, might have been responsible for the serpent's attack in the garden originally. They interpret a line stating, Horon came to the goddess's aid because she would be bereft of her offspring, with Horon as the implied subject. However, other scholars think it's the goddess whose offspring are at risk. Regarding the tree, Corporal and Diore view it as the tree of life transformed into a tree of death by the serpent's venom, which Horon must remove. Others think Horon is simply using a tree branch like a magic wand to neutralize the serpent's venom. While every detail of this myth is debated, it offers another significant parallel to the Eden story. In KTU 117, which seems to be set in the vineyard of the gods, likely the Ugaritic equivalent of Eden, the story begins with Adamu encountering a serpent, according to Corporal and Diore's interpretation of the fragmented text. Later, the serpent's victim is named Shugarizizu, who calls upon the sun goddess Shapshu as he succumbs to poison. After a missing part in the text, Shapshu summons Horon to bind the serpent. Horon appears to neutralize the poison, while Shapshu clears away a malevolent fog covering the mountains. Unfortunately, the ending of the text is too damaged to reveal what happens to Adamu and Shugarizizu. It's clear why Corporal and Diore were intrigued by this tablet. It describes a heavenly vineyard, an attack by a serpent, and introduces a character named Adamu, similar to the Hebrew Adam. The authors suggest Adamu was a divine figure sent to protect the tree of life from the serpent, preventing harm to the world. They even point to ancient seals from Cyprus depicting a three-headed serpent attacking Adamu. However, their interpretation is debated because the surviving parts of the tablet don't mention a tree or clarify Adamu's role. The mention of Adamu in a story about a divine garden and serpent raises interesting questions. Who is Adamu? Could there be a connection to the biblical Adam? Ancient texts from Ugarit, Ebla, Anatolia, and Egypt occasionally refer to a deity named Adama or Adamu, with variations in spelling. In earlier texts, Adama is clearly a goddess, often linked with Reshef, the underworld god. Later texts from Anatolia and Ugarit often pair Adamu with the goddess Kubaba, who later became Cybele, the Phrygian mother goddess. Whether Adamu was male, female, or androgynous in these texts remains unclear. Several theories exist about the origin of Adama. According to Frans van de Vel and Karel van der Toorn in their article for the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, the prevailing view is that the name means soil or earth, making it suitable for a goddess associated with the underworld. Francesco Aspesi, an expert in Semitic linguistics, suggests that the Hebrew word Adam, which also means soil or earth, might have originated from the goddess Adamu. This parallels how the name of the Syro-Canaanite god Reshef often appears in the Bible as a term for plague and destruction, after its original divine context. This means that even if Corporal and Deore are mistaken about KTU 117 as a direct predecessor of the Eden story, the ancient Syro-Canaanite earth deity Adama might still be lurking in the background of the Eden story, and the first man whose name Adam represents the Hebrew words for both man and soil. As we have already seen, Earth Mother goddesses are a frequent element of Near Eastern creation stories involving the forming of humans from clay. In the story of Eden, Eve's name means life, symbolizing her role as the mother of all living beings. In ancient interpretations, she corresponds to figures like the mother goddess Kuapa or Sybil, though depicted in a humanized form. Often, when we read the Eden story from a Christian perspective, it focuses heavily on human sin and failure. However, if we revisit Genesis chapters 2 and 3 without these theological lenses, the narrative reveals something deeper. Yahweh, the Creator, plants a magnificent garden but realizes he needs someone to care for it. He forms a creature from clay and breathes life into it. However, Yahweh overlooks the need for companionship and attempts to solve this by creating animals, which don't fulfill the need. Finally, Yahweh creates Eve as a suitable companion for
whispers fade into the street, lonely echoes we repeat, lost in shadows where we meet. Voices soft like velvet air, secrets floating everywhere. Feel your heartbeat like a prayer, two souls tangled in despair. In the shadows we fade. Pieces of a shattered mind that search but never see. You and I eternally dancing in this revelry, chained to our pieces of a shattered world. Fading whispers, hearts entwined. In the shadows we behind. These pieces of a shattered world. Ones that search but never see. You and I eternally dancing in this revelry, chained to our own memory. Lights are dim, the world is hushed. Every touch a gentle rush. Darkness wraps us in its clutch. In this dream we both are raised. Any dawn will bring release from this haunting, bittersweet peace. But for now we find no cease, lost in shadows, finding no peace.
For Adam. Yet, Yahweh's plans unravel when a clever serpent enters the garden and deceives Eve into eating forbidden fruit. Eve's human nature, curiosity, and vulnerability to influence play a role in this. When Adam also eats the fruit, Yahweh's design for humanity and the garden collapses. The story suggests that even Yahweh, the divine creator, faces unexpected challenges and outcomes. This narrative isn't just about human failure, but also acknowledges the limits and unpredictability in divine plans. Ultimately, Yahweh expels Adam and Eve from the garden, unable to fully restore his original vision. The Eden story thus explores themes of human nature, divine foresight, and the complexities of free will, revealing that even divine plans can encounter unforeseen obstacles. In the Ugaritic myth on tablet KTU 1.1100, scholars like Del Olmo Leite interpret it as a story about magic and the limits of divine power. According to this myth, at the dawn of creation, magic existed independently from the gods who ruled over Earth. These gods were unable to protect the land from evil creatures, such as a serpent that poisoned the garden. Only Haru, an underworld deity not recognized in the pantheon, possessed the knowledge of magical incantations to counter the serpent's poison. Similarly, the Ugaritic tale of Baal and his battle against the sea dragon Lotan reflects a theme where Lotan represents primordial chaos existing outside the ordered creation. Likewise, Leviathan, the chaos serpent mentioned in biblical texts such as Psalms and Isaiah, symbolizes a primal force opposing Yahweh's created order. The serpent in the Garden of Eden embodies this same chaotic threat at the beginning of history, which even Yahweh couldn't prevent. The tree of life in the garden also plays a significant role, capable of affecting events contrary to Yahweh's intentions. Together, these stories suggest that ancient myths across cultures explore themes of divine limitation and the persistent presence of chaotic forces outside divine control. In the Ugaritic myth on tablet KTU 1.1100, the resolution involves Haru, an underworld deity, marrying the sky goddess and giving her serpents as gifts. This act unites heaven with the underworld, bringing the primeval magic, or second power, under the control of the gods. This signifies an acceptance of independent magical powers within Ugaritic religious beliefs. On the contrary, Israelite theology takes a different approach by rejecting the practice of magic. According to Del Olmo Lete, Israel's religious conception involves rejecting the notion of independent magical powers. Instead, Israelite religious tradition emphasizes Yahweh's sole authority and power over creation, without acknowledging external magical forces. Despite this rejection in theory, the influence of the ancient two-power system, where divine and magical powers coexist, persisted in Israelite religious practices and shaped their understanding of origins and ethical principles for centuries. The concept of evil's origin is explored through ancient Near Eastern myths, which often depict a primordial struggle involving multiple divine and non-divine agents, rather than a singular divine protagonist. Despite efforts to find a perfect parallel to the Garden of Eden story in ancient texts, scholars like Corbel and Diore's theory proposing Ugaritic tablets as predecessors remain intriguing but require caution due to the incomplete nature of the texts. Nevertheless, nearly every element of the Eden narrative finds parallels in the myths of surrounding nations. For instance, Adam's name may trace back to Adama, an earth goddess, highlighting connections to creation myths involving humans fashioned from clay, the symbolism of the tree of life, and the presence of hostile serpents. The version of Genesis we have today was written much later than these early myths, potentially centuries or even millennia later. It reflects a deliberate shift towards monotheism, emphasizing Yahweh as the sole national god over the traditional Canaanite pantheon. This required a reinterpretation of older myths while retaining their core elements. Unveiling the ancient roots of the Garden of Eden story. The story of the Garden of Eden, as recounted in the Book of Genesis, is a foundational narrative in Judeo-Christian theology. However, its origins and evolution reveal a complex interplay of ancient Near Eastern myths and theological developments. Ancient Near Eastern parallels. The Garden of Eden narrative resonates with themes found in various ancient Near Eastern myths. These include motifs such as the creation of humans from clay, the existence of a tree of life, and encounters with serpents embodying primordial chaos. Scholars have identified parallels in texts from neighboring cultures, such as Ugaritic myths and Sumerian literature, suggesting a shared cultural heritage and worldview. One intriguing theory posited by scholars like Corbel and Dior suggests that the tablets found in Ugarit, an ancient city in modern-day Syria, might preserve a direct predecessor to the Eden tale. These tablets depict a world where magical forces and divine beings interact, influencing early concepts of creation and cosmic order. Evolution of the Genesis narrative. The version of Genesis we possess today likely took shape centuries or even millennia after the earliest versions of similar myths. It reflects a theological shift towards monotheism, distinguishing Yahweh as the singular national deity over the polytheistic Canaanite pantheon. This evolution necessitated a reimagining of older myths to fit within a monotheistic framework while retaining familiar elements. Adam, the first human in Genesis, has etymological ties to Adama, an earth goddess in earlier myths, suggesting continuity in themes of creation and human origins across cultures. The Eden story, therefore, can be seen as a reinterpretation of older myths, adapted to reflect Israelite theological and cultural perspectives. Theological implications. Central to the Eden narrative is the concept of the origin of evil and human disobedience. In contrast to some ancient myths where divine and non-divine agents coexist in a complex cosmology, Genesis presents a clearer moral narrative centered on human choice and divine judgment. This shift reflects the evolving theological concerns of Israelite society as they grappled with questions of morality, divine authority, and the human condition. Continuity in cultural memory. Despite the theological shifts in monotheistic Judaism and Christianity, echoes of older myths persist in biblical storytelling. The presence of motifs like cosmic struggle, creation from clay, and the pursuit of immortality through sacred trees underscores the enduring influence of ancient Near Eastern traditions on biblical narratives. And that's all for today's video. See you in some other video some other day. Thank you.